Hi, everyone. I'm Daniel Rubenstein. Today is November 21st, 2024, and this is the live daily briefing of the Israeli Citizen Spokesperson's Office. We're live on Instagram, X, YouTube, LinkedIn, and available afterwards wherever you get your podcasts. So please, you can start submitting questions in the chat, like, subscribe, follow, help us reach a wider audience. There is breaking news that came out just before I was about to go live. The International Criminal Court has just issued arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the defense minister for most of the October 7th war, Gallant. The ICC has charged them with war crimes and crimes against humanity. It's a disgrace, and I'll tell you why it's a disgrace. I have just printed the document before I went live on the air. I am looking at it now. First, the court rejected any attempt by Israel to say that the court does not have jurisdiction. The arrest warrants, the court says, are classified as secret. We will not get to see the arrest warrants. The court says that's in order to protect witnesses and to safeguard the conduct of investigations. But ultimately, the court says the alleged conduct of Netanyahu and Gallant falls within the jurisdiction of the court. It says that Netanyahu and Gallant bear criminal responsibility for the war crimes of starvation, crimes against humanity, murder, persecution, and other inhumane acts. And the court completely dismisses all of the Israeli attempts to provide humanitarian aid to Gaza in the past year and accuses Netanyahu and Gallant of presiding over a campaign of starvation of Gaza. So what can we say about this? Again, this is breaking news just right now, but my initial reaction is to go back to the basics. On October 7th, 2023, the Hamas government of Gaza invaded Israel with 3,000 men and carried out barbaric atrocities. They murdered 1,200 people. They gunned down hundreds of people at a music festival. They massacred people in their homes. They took more than 200 people hostage. Hamas promised to carry out more October 7th massacres until Israel's destroyed. So the threat, which the ICC doesn't care so much about, the threat from Hamas is clear. It's the threat of annihilation. The proportionate response to this threat is the removal of the threat. Israel's war against Hamas is a just war. That's point number one. Israel is fighting a just war, and it is fighting it justly. There is no nation that has ever faced an enemy like the one that Israel is facing. We are not talking about like what the United States faced after 9/11, flying thousands of miles to find Al-Qaeda in its safe haven of Afghanistan. The distance between Israel and Gaza is a distance of a few football fields. It's possible to run that distance in a few minutes. The people in Gaza who are threatening to annihilate Israel, they are living running distance away from Israel. They are using densely populated urban areas in order to wage war. This means that in residential buildings in Gaza, that Hamas prepositions weapons, sniper rifles, RPGs, and so on. It means that Hamas has a massive tunnel network under these buildings. It means that Hamas guys can pop up anywhere and fire RPGs at Israel. So it's not just what was going on October 7th, but in the days after, thousands of rockets were being fired from Gaza. Israel needed to remove that threat and needs to remove that threat, while at the same time, hostages are living in Gaza in Hamas's terror dungeon. Somewhere in captivity in Gaza still today are 101 Israeli hostages. So this is the challenge that the ICC ignores. Find a general who can see the threat that I've just described, this urban warfare threat. Find a general who can create a plan for victory that follows the Geneva Conventions, international law, and the laws of war, and see if that plan is anything different from what Israel was doing. You don't get to say that a just war is unjust because of how the enemy fights. It makes no sense. At the same time, it's very clear that Israel has facilitated the transfer of massive amounts of humanitarian aid into Gaza. Food, water, medicine, shelter equipment, medical equipment, all of it can go into Gaza. There is a dedicated unit of the IDF, of the Ministry of Defense, called COGAT, which is there in order to facilitate the transfer of humanitarian aid into Gaza. And since this operation began, humanitarian aid has come into Gaza from air, land, and sea. There was a sea crossing, a sea entrance that the United States set up. There are border crossings between Israel and Gaza, and there's also a border crossing between Gaza and Egypt, which the Egyptians closed. There are massive amounts of humanitarian aid that were going into Gaza. The international aid agencies failed to step up to the plate and distribute that aid effectively. But the truth is, it's hard in the middle of a war when Hamas is using these urban areas to attack Israel. Those same urban areas are places where people are in need of humanitarian aid. So it's a question of who's going to risk their life in the middle of a war to deliver like Amazon Prime to someone's doorstep at the last possible moment. This is not realistic. The pressure against Israel is coming from everywhere. The International Criminal Court, the international aid agencies that demand an immediate ceasefire in Gaza before hostages are returned, they're demanding that Israel go back to October 6th in exchange for nothing. The international aid agencies that are eager to cooperate with Hamas in Gaza, Gaza's civilian police, as they call them, these aid agencies are demanding that Israel go back to October 6th when Hamas was free to prepare for war, and international organizations like UNRWA provided services to Palestinians that the Hamas government should have provided but didn't because it was focused on preparing for war. Right now, this one is hard to believe. Right now, international aid agencies are asking Israel to allow more cigarettes into Gaza. Yes, international aid agencies want the people of Gaza to have a normal life with access to cheap cancer sticks, while the Hamas rapist regime that the people of Gaza cheered for on October 7th continue to hold 101 Israeli hostages. It's unbearable. The answer is no. The UN Security Council that just tried to pass a resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza before the release of hostages, they're demanding that Israel go back to October 6th. Only a US veto from the Biden administration prevented this anti-Israel measure from passing the Security Council. The UK and France voted in favor. They want to go back to October 6th. It is shameful to demand an immediate ceasefire that is not conditional on the immediate release of all of the hostages. The pressure against Israel isn't just coming from the ICC or the UN or international organizations, it's coming from elected officials in the United States, many of whom would tell you that they are pro-Israel. I'm talking about the roughly 1/3 of Democrats in the United States Senate who voted to suspend the transfer of some offensive weapons to Israel. They are demanding that Israel go back to October 6th. The resolution spearheaded by Senator Bernie Sanders didn't pass, thankfully. Some of the senators who voted in favor of the measure said they support the transfer of what they call defensive weapons, like anti-missile systems. They are okay with Israel shooting missiles out of the sky, but they aren't okay with Israel shooting the missiles while they're on the launch pad. This is October 6th thinking. They need to know the Iron Dome saves a lot of lives, but the Iron Dome doctrine led to the October 7th massacre. Sitting and waiting for terrorist armies to attack is not an option. Israel will not allow terrorist armies to mobilize on its border ever again. Not in Gaza, not in Lebanon, not on any border. There is enormous international pressure on Israel to end its war against Hezbollah in Lebanon without any guarantees that there won't be another war soon. There are more than 60,000 Israelis who fled their homes because Hezbollah was shooting at them. They can't go back home if Hezbollah remains armed in close range. There is enormous international pressure on Israel to allow the same conditions that existed in Lebanon for the past 2 decades to continue to exist forever. Anyone who makes any positive reference to UN Security Council Resolution 1701 wants to go back to October 6th. It is this very UN resolution that created the conditions whereby Hezbollah could have massive rocket arsenals, massive numbers of suicide drones, massive tunnel networks near Israel's border. A return to a framework of empty UN Security Council resolutions is a return to October 6th thinking. The people of Israel are not going back to October 6th. We don't want ceasefires. We don't want UN resolutions. We want peace. We want peace. Wars should end with peace. There's an essay I recommend you all read today in the publication called Unheard. The author is Shani Moore. He writes, across the West, diplomats and experts have settled on a consensus for solving the ongoing Arab-Israeli war, one that reveals exactly why international diplomatic efforts have consistently failed. At its core, this approach focuses on restoring the very ceasefire conditions which Lebanon and Hezbollah violated last year, while avoiding any mention of even the desirability of peace, something Lebanon would benefit from more than any other party. In failing to recognize this, our international diplomats embody all the pathologies and failures that have come to define their contribution to this decades-long conflict. To that, we can also add the International Criminal Court saying that Israel is not allowed to defend itself against its neighbors that seek to wipe it off the map. Let's take some questions from people who are watching live on our social media streams, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube. Let's go.
Thank you, Daniel. This is a question we received on Instagram stories. What should Israel do in response to the warrants issued by the ICC?
The question of what should Israel do implies that Israel has a real choice. This is not a war of choice. We did not choose the October 7th war. We did not choose to have Hamas call for our annihilation and act upon that dream on October 7th. We didn't choose for Hezbollah to join the war on October 8th. We have terrorist armies that have established themselves on our borders, Iranian proxies, a ring of fire around our borders that if we don't defend ourselves against, we won't have a country. So if some international institution that Israel is not a part of is going to tell Israel, no, you have to stop defending yourself, well, our simple answer is we're not willing to die. We're going to keep defending ourselves. And we hope that enough people in the rest of the world will understand that we are fighting an existential war, not just for ourselves, but for all of humanity. If these terrorist armies on our borders succeed, you're next.
Karen on Instagram asked, what exactly do these arrest warrants mean? Do we know yet what the potential consequences of them could be?
So I have not read up on the details, but I can assure you with some degree of confidence that the Prime Minister of Israel is going to continue being the Prime Minister of Israel, regardless of what the International Criminal Court says or does about him. He will be able to fulfill his duties and carry out his duties in Israel. The former defense minister who's named in this arrest warrant issued for him as well, Yoav Gallant, he is no longer the defense minister, he is a member of parliament. It remains to be seen what his reaction will be, where he will be able to travel and so on. I also didn't mention that the ICC also issued arrest warrants for Ismail Haniyeh, Mohammed Deif, and Yahya Sinwar, but these guys are the heads of the Hamas regime that carried out the October 7th massacre, and they have been removed on the battlefield, so they will not be having to ask if they're free to travel. But in the meantime, it seems Hamas guys are pretty safe between Qatar and Turkey.
Thank you, Daniel. Also from Instagram, does this affect the leaders' abilities to travel to other countries if the countries can extradite them to the ICC?
Yes, it may. First of all, it depends on if a country invites you to come visit, then it's understood that a head of state or a head of government has immunity from international prosecution. But it remains to be seen if any of these countries that take the ICC seriously would consider inviting someone for a business meeting if that same person is being sought for war crimes and crimes against humanity. So ultimately, it may be a question for some of the countries like the UK, France, the EU, and others. What is their reaction going to be? And if the Prime Minister of Israel wants to come meet with them to talk about issues of mutual concern between the two countries, are they going to say yes or no? We'll have to wait and see.
This is our final question from YouTube. Does the U.S. administration have any influence on the ICC? And do you think that the incoming Trump administration could do something to help?
I don't know that the United States has influence on the ICC specifically. The United States is not a party to the Rome Statute, meaning that the United States does not accept the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court. So the United States and Israel both have this in common. The United States does not accept the jurisdiction of the ICC to prosecute or issue arrest warrants for American soldiers for example. So the ability of the United States to influence the ICC is probably limited, but the United States does have the ability to influence other countries that have an interest in Israel winning the war and not seeing Hamas and Hezbollah empowered even further than they already have been. So I would expect and hope that the United States would use all of its diplomatic power to marginalize the effect of the ICC by working with countries that are like-minded, and hopefully the ICC in the future will not be taken hostage by people who wish to see Israel wiped off the map, take no regard of any of the threats that Israel's facing, and just hope that Israel will sit back and surrender. That's all the time we have for today. We'll continue to follow the story about the International Criminal Court. We'll have more for you on that in the days ahead. In the meantime, we will be back Sunday, 3 p.m. Israel time, right here on the Israeli Citizen Spokesperson's Office. I'm Daniel Rubenstein. Thank you so much for watching and have a great weekend.